Karen marched across the dock with a clipboard in hand and superiority in her eyes. "You can't park that boat here," she snapped at the man tightening a rope on the pier. But her smugness vanished the moment he smiled and replied, "That's strange because I own this lake." Marcus Wright had spent most of his adult life either following orders or giving them. As a decorated Navy logistics officer, he had traveled the world and learned the value of discipline, patience, and reading between the lines. But when he retired from active duty at 42, he didn't crave medals or speeches. He wanted quiet, the kind of quiet you only get with morning fog rolling off still water, bird calls echoing through trees, and the gentle creak of a boat shifting against a dock. So when a rare listing for a privately owned lake popped up in his real estate alerts, he drove straight from his home in Norfolk, Virginia, to take a look. Lake Barrow was everything he'd dreamed of, untouched, surrounded by tall pines, and hidden behind a wealthy suburban community with big houses and even bigger egos. The lake had once been part of a failed resort development that never got off the ground, and when the last developer defaulted on their taxes, the county quietly took ownership of the property. No one in the HOA paid attention. After all, the homeowners believed the lake was theirs just because they had used it freely for decades. But Marcus saw opportunity. He did his homework, ran a title search, and confirmed something shocking. The lake, the docks, and the boat access trail had no encumbrances. It was legally up for sale. Marcus put in a cash offer that very week, and by the time the sun set on the third Friday of that April, he was the sole owner of Lake Barrow and its full water rights. He didn't expect fanfare. He didn't want attention. His plan was simple: convert the small boathouse into a weekend cabin, take his boat out early in the mornings, fish alone, and maybe, eventually, invite a few close friends to join him. That piece lasted all of 4 days. It was a Thursday morning, barely past 7, when Marcus pulled up to the lakeside entrance in his matte black pickup truck, towing his freshly detailed fishing boat behind him. The gate was open. The gravel path freshly raked, details he hadn't arranged but assumed were a leftover habit from the old fishing club. He figured the homeowners group had been maintaining the space out of routine. That would change soon. For now, he simply drove down the winding trail, parked by the dock, and started unhooking the boat. The smell of the pines mixed with the lake's mist and the crisp air. Birds chirped as he tightened the mooring rope, getting ready to step aboard. His peace was perfect, until it wasn't. He didn't see her at first, just heard the unmistakable sound of angry sandals smacking gravel, fast, purposeful. He turned to find a short, middle-aged woman storming toward him, clipboard in hand like a courtroom summons. She wore a pink sun visor pulled low over perfectly highlighted hair, oversized sunglasses that didn't hide her scowl, and a windbreaker embroidered with Barrow Lakeside HOA, President. "Excuse me," she barked. Marcus stood up straight but kept his tone even. "Morning. You can't park that boat here," she snapped, tapping her clipboard. "This is HOA property. Dock access is restricted to fishing club members only. You'll need to leave immediately." Marcus blinked. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think so," she cut in. "This lake is part of the HOA. We've had the same rules for 20 years. We don't allow random people to use these docks, especially people we haven't seen before." That pause was deliberate, and Marcus caught it. The especially people didn't sit right with him. He glanced at the expensive homes in the distance, mostly white faces peeking out their windows. Already curious, he took a breath. "My name is Marcus Wright. I bought this lake and its surrounding land from the county last month. I own it. Now, these docks included." Karen blinked. "That's impossible." "You what?" Marcus pulled a folder from his backpack, flipping it open to reveal the purchase agreement, title, and map showing the full extent of his property lines. The water shimmered behind him. She squinted at the paperwork like it might bite her. "No," she said flatly. "This isn't valid. That land has been part of the community since it was built. We've used this lake for fishing tournaments, HOA events, paddleboat yoga." "That may be true," Marcus said, still calm, "but the legal owner was the county. They foreclosed on the land over unpaid taxes 10 years ago. Your developer went bankrupt. It was never transferred to the HOA. The county listed it for sale. I purchased it legally, cleanly, and with full water rights." Karen was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened and crossed her arms. "I don't care what papers you have. If you think you're going to just roll in here and take over our lake, you've got another thing coming. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting, and don't be surprised when you're fined for trespassing." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome to call whoever you want, ma'am, but I'm not trespassing. You are." That hit her like a slap. She recoiled, then spun around and marched back up the gravel path without another word, mumbling about entitled squatters and making some calls. Marcus just sighed. He didn't expect to make friends, but he hadn't expected this kind of drama on day one. What followed over the next week was absurd. First, a letter arrived from the HOA's compliance committee stating that Marcus had violated community guidelines by operating a commercial fishing vessel on the lake. Then came the phone calls, blocked numbers leaving voicemails about unregistered structures and unauthorized vehicle access. One morning, a laminated notice was zip-tied to his boathouse door, declaring it unapproved construction, subject to removal. Marcus began documenting everything. He photographed every sign, saved every letter, and recorded every voicemail. He wasn't rattled. He'd spent years dealing with bureaucratic nonsense far more complicated than petty HOA politics. What surprised him wasn't their harassment hit, was their confidence. They really believed they owned the lake. That somehow, their sense of entitlement overrode legal documents. He wondered if they'd even checked the county's registry on the 5th day. Marcus drove to the county office and requested a full title history. The clerk, an older gentleman named Dwight, chuckled when he saw the file. "You're the first one to actually buy the thing," Dwight said. "Developers kept promising to finish the resort, but no one ever paid taxes. That lake's been county property for over a decade." Marcus smiled. "Well, now it's mine." Dwight nodded. "You're going to stir up a hornet's nest. The HOA folks been acting like they owned that lake forever." "They're already buzzing," Marcus said. "I'm just making sure my paperwork is bulletproof." By the following Monday, Marcus had sent a certified cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop interfering with his property and access. In the letter, he explained their mistake and gave them 1 week to correct their actions before he pursued legal action. He expected that might cool things down. Instead, it lit the match. The next day, Karen returned, this time with 3 other board members, all in matching polos like some kind of suburban SWAT team. They came down the trail and stood in a line at the edge of the dock, arms folded, blocking his path. One of them held a clipboard. Another filmed on their phone. "You have no right to bar community members from lake access," the man in the middle said stiffly. "We've filed an injunction with the HOA attorney. Until it's resolved, you are hereby trespassing." Marcus didn't respond with anger. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a second folder, this one full of printed emails from the county zoning office, a statement from the sheriff's department confirming his ownership rights, and the original deed stamped by the county clerk. "You can file whatever you want," Marcus said, stepping closer. "But if you step on my dock again without permission, you'll be the one escorted off by the sheriff." There was silence. Karen stared him down, but something in her face shifted. For the first time, there was a flicker of doubt or fear. She turned and walked away without another word. The rest followed. Dot and Marcus, standing tall at the edge of his dock, watched them go, knowing this was far from over. But now, the game had changed and he was no longer playing defense. The week after Karen's showdown on the dock was oddly quiet. Too quiet. Marcus wasn't foolish enough to believe she had accepted defeat. People like her never surrendered without a fresh plan. She had retreated, yes, but not out of fear. No, Karen was regrouping. She'd tasted power for too long to give it up easily. Marcus knew the silence wasn't peace, it was a pause before another storm. He kept his routine steady. Early mornings on the lake, coffee in hand. His rod propped on the railing of his boat, birds calling from the trees, and the water still enough to see the sky in it. He didn't push boundaries, he didn't confront anyone, he just used what was his. But he noticed changes. The gravel path he had previously found raked and clear was now lined with sticks and garbage. Someone had driven nails into a few planks on the dock, badly concealed, but dangerous. He removed them quietly, made notes, took photos, and saved everything. It wasn't just sabotage, it was spite. On Wednesday morning, Marcus came down the path to find a bright orange sticker slapped across the side of his boathouse. "Stop work. Unauthorized structure." It looked official at first glance, but on closer inspection, the seal didn't match any known department. It had been made on a home printer, complete with a fake barcode and an invented department logo labeled Lakeside Zoning Authority. "Nice try." Marcus peeled it off and slid it into a manila folder with the others. He wasn't getting angry, he was building a case. Let them dig their own hole. By Friday, he finally got a call from someone other than the HOA. The sheriff's office rang him up around 3 p.m. The deputy's voice was polite but firm. "Mr. Wright, we received a complaint from the Barrow Lakeside HOA. They're saying you've blocked public access to the lake and that residents feel threatened by your presence. We'd like to come down and take a look." Marcus didn't flinch. "No problem at all, deputy. I'll be here all afternoon." They arrived within the hour, 2 squad cars, lights off but presence unmistakable. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Karen herself stood across the street with arms folded like a queen, watching her enforcers carry out orders. The deputy, a tall, balding man named Eric, approached Marcus calmly. "Mind showing us the documents?" Marcus handed over a copy of the deed, the county map, and the cease and desist letter he'd sent to the HOA. Deputy Eric took his time reading it, his partner looking over the boathouse and dock. "This is solid," Eric finally said. "You own this outright. They had no right to report you for trespassing." Marcus nodded. "That's what I told them, but I'm not here to fight. I just want to be left alone." Eric sighed and leaned in a bit. "Off the record, they're furious, but there's nothing they can do legally. Karen's been calling us nonstop. Most of the department thinks it's harassment, but we have to follow up on complaints, even if they're nonsense." Marcus appreciated the honesty. "So what happens now?" "We file a report, close the case. If they try to escalate this, It won't go far. That should have been the end of it. It WASN single quotes 2 days later, Marcus received a letter not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm claiming to represent the Barrow Lakeside Fishing Club, a subdivision under the umbrella. The letter was full of bluster, unlawful obstruction of traditional use, violation of easement by implication, and the ever-dramatic emotional distress caused to long-time residents. They were threatening to sue. Marcus read the letter slowly, then read it again. He wasn't surprised, just impressed by their creativity. The fishing club was trying to argue that, because they had used the lake for years, they had some kind of implied legal right to keep using it even though it had never been part of their legal deed. He contacted his attorney, a detail-obsessed woman named Renee who had once helped him sort out a zoning battle with the city of Norfolk. She read the letter, chuckled, and said, "They're bluffing. There's no standing here, but if they want a war, we'll give them one." Renee drafted a formal response, reminding the fishing club that no easement, public or private, existed in the title records, that the land had been county property for over a decade, and that no fishing rights, permits, or dock leases had been registered by anyone other than Marcus. She also reminded them that further harassment would be met with a lawsuit for defamation, trespass, and intentional interference with lawful use of property. The moment the letter went out, the HOA's mask slipped completely. The very next morning, Marcus woke up to honking long, loud, obnoxious blasts from several golf carts lined up at the bottom of his driveway. A group of homeowners, led of course by Karen, had gathered in protest. They held up signs that read, "This is our lake, stop the land grab." And the worst one, "Property rights don't make you right." Marcus stood at the edge of his property, arms crossed, watching them with quiet disbelief. It was surreal. Karen stepped forward, her voice loud and theatrical. "You can't silence the community. You may have bought the land, but you didn't buy our history." He didn't say a word. He turned around, walked back to his cabin, and called the sheriff's office again. Deputies arrived 15 minutes later and told the group to disperse. They refused until Marcus produced a copy of the restraining notice his lawyer had prepared. The moment the word injunction was mentioned, the crowd broke up. Some peeled away quickly, others muttered under their breath. Karen remained, until the end, staring at Marcus with something that was no longer arrogance. It was something colder, something more dangerous. She knew she was losing, and people like her, when they start to lose, don't quit, they scheme. That evening, Marcus got a visit from an older gentleman named Henry, who lived just outside the HOA boundaries, near the public road. He was soft-spoken, in his 70s, and carried a box of fresh peaches from his backyard tree. "I heard what's been happening," Henry said, settling onto a porch chair beside Marcus. "Been watching from a distance. Figured I'd stop by before they made you the villain in every newsletter." Marcus smiled faintly. "They already have." Henry nodded. "That sounds about right. I lived here before the HOA was even formed. Back when this place was just land and ideas. That lake was never part of their claim, no matter what they say. You bought it fair. They're just mad they didn't think to do it themselves." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the crickets. Then Henry said, "Word of advice. Keep everything, emails, letters, even the garbage they leave by your trail. HOAS, don't fight fair. They exhaust people. But you seem like someone they won't break." Marcus appreciated that more than he let on. He offered Henry a beer, and the two watched the sun dip behind the trees. By the time the sky turned dark, Marcus knew two things for certain. One, Karen wasn't done, and two, she had no idea who she was dealing with, because this wasn't about a boat, or a dock, or even a lake anymore. This was about control, and Marcus wasn't giving up an inch. Marcus knew what was coming the moment he saw the white SUV creeping down the gravel road the next morning. It was spotless, out of place among the thick pine trees and lake mud, more suburban driveway than off-road cruiser. The tinted windows gave no hint of the driver's face, but the way it paused at the edge of the boathouse property spoke volumes. It wasn't lost or exploring, it was watching. He stood motionless by the railing of the dock, sipping black coffee from a thermos and pretending not to notice. Eventually, the SUV rolled forward and disappeared back into the trees. He waited another 10 seconds, then pulled where how his phone had marked the time. 8:32 a.m. 2 hours later, a drone buzzed overhead. He didn't spot it right away, just heard the faint hum, barely louder than the breeze through the pine needles. But when he looked up, there it was, a silver quadcopter hovering 50 feet above his dock, camera lens pointed down like the eye of a hawk. He waved once, slowly, then pulled out his own phone and snapped a photo of it. He didn't bother trying to knock it down. He knew the game they were playing. The drone would be registered to some obscure HOA vendor, or perhaps a resident teenager whose parents were deeply concerned about neighborhood security. But Marcus wasn't a man who reacted impulsively. He played the long game, emailed the photo to Renee, his attorney, with the subject line, "They've leveled up," she called within the hour. "They're trying to bait you, probably hoping you'll lose your temper. Break the drone, yell at someone, anything they can spin into aggression. Don't give them what they want." "I never do," Marcus said flatly. "Well, it's time." We turn this up a notch. We need to go public. He hesitated. You mean media? No, she replied. Not yet. I mean the community. That same afternoon, Marcus printed 50 copies of a one-page flyer. He didn't add graphics or angry slogans, just facts. The legal ownership of the lake, a map showing the property lines, a breakdown of the fishing club's lack of any legal easement, and a clear warning that trespassers would be prosecuted. He posted it at the clubhouse bulletin board, slipped copies into a few local mailboxes outside the HOA zone, and left a stack at Henry's porch with a note. Feel free to share. Henry called. That night, laughing, you lit a fire under some folks. You should have seen Karen trying to rip your flyer down from the community board like it was radioactive. She can't rip the truth, Marcus said. But that truth, as always, came with consequences the next day. He got his first formal notice of code violation from the HOA. The envelope was thick, stuffed with photos, some clearly taken by his cabin, his boat, even the outdoor grill he'd set up on the deck. The letter accused him of unauthorized construction, open flame use without permit, and exceeding noise thresholds. It warned of daily fines accumulating at $500 a day until he complied with community guidelines that would have been comical if not for how serious they were. Marcus scanned the entire document, filed it and forwarded a copy to Renee. She responded with a concise email. They've made a critical mistake. Let me handle this. That same week, a letter arrived at the HOA office on embossed legal stationery. It demanded immediate cessation of harassment, outlined the legal invalidity of their claimed jurisdiction, and cited state laws prohibiting false code enforcement beyond legal boundaries. It also included a draft complaint Marcus was prepared to file if they didn't back down. The tone shifted overnight. Karen disappeared from public view for 3 days. The gossip circles around Barrow Lakeside buzzed with speculation. Some said she had been advised to step down from her HOA position. Others claimed she was preparing a counterattack with new lawyers. Marcus didn't care which version was true. He wasn't focused on Karen anymore. He was focused on the community because while the HOA board tried to play dirty, the people around them, the regular residents, the families, the retired folks, had started to ask questions. Marcus could feel it in the way neighbors looked at him when he passed them on the trail. Not with fear or suspicion anymore, but with curiosity. One afternoon, a young couple approached him at the lakeside trail with their toddler in tow. The husband offered a handshake. You're the guy who bought the lake, right? He asked. That's me, Marcus replied. I just wanted to say I think what they're doing to you is wrong. We didn't even know the HOA didn't own the lake. We've been paying into that stupid fishing club for 5 years. I'm sorry, Marcus said. That money should never have been collected. The wife added, a few of us are talking about demanding refunds. Karen always said the club was legally part of our dues. She lied, Marcus said simply. Word spread quickly. Within a week, several residents had contacted the county directly and confirmed Marcus's ownership. Others shared the flyer through neighborhood email chains. Someone even posted a side-by-side comparison of Marcus's deed and the HOA's governing documents in a community Facebook group, pointing out that nowhere was the lake included in HOA jurisdiction. It was like someone had kicked open a door. The final blow came from inside the HOA itself. A man named Greg Talley, former HOA vice president and longtime resident, resigned publicly in a letter posted to the community's digital newsletter. In it, he wrote, "It is clear that we, as a board, acted based on assumptions and pride rather than facts. Mr. Wright did not steal our lake. He bought what we failed to secure. And instead of welcoming him, we chose conflict. That is not leadership. That is failure." It was the first sign of fracture. Karen tried to do damage control, sending out a new wave of community updates filled with vague promises and legal threats. But the spell was broken. People had seen the truth, and now they wanted answers. The fishing club collapsed first. Memberships were cancelled. Refund demands were filed. And angry homeowners showed up at the next board meeting with printouts and receipts. Some even accused Karen of misappropriating HOA funds to maintain the docks on property that wasn't theirs. Marcus didn't attend the meeting, but Henry did. He called him afterward. "You missed a show," Henry said with a wheezy laugh. "They nearly voted her out tonight. Couldn't get the full count, but they're calling for a special election. She's toast. She had every chance to walk away quietly," Marcus replied. "She chose war." "Well, war's over," Henry said, "and you won." Marcus sat on his porch that evening, staring out at the lake under a silver moon. The water was still, the air warm. He listened to the frogs croaking near the reeds and the soft hum of insects rising like a song from the woods. For the first time since he moved in, he felt the tension leave his shoulders. He didn't enjoy winning, not in the way people expected. For him, this wasn't about pride or proving a point. It was about principle, about protecting what was his and exposing the rot behind Karen's smile. He had stood his ground without raising his voice, and in the end, the truth had been louder than her lies. But even now, with the conflict dying down, Marcus knew better than to let his guard down completely. People like Karen didn't disappear, they rebranded. They waited for the next opportunity. and when she made her next move he'd be ready. Marcus had always believed that when people lost control, they tended to do one of two things: withdraw and accept reality, or double down and light everything around them on fire. Karen Whitmore, unsurprisingly, belonged to the latter group, and even as her support in the HOA began to crumble, her determination to regain dominance over Lake Barrow only intensified. The special election to remove her as president of the HOA was scheduled for a Saturday morning. Word had spread quickly: flyers, email threads, even hushed conversations at the community grocery store. Several residents who had once blindly supported Karen were now questioning every policy, every financial decision, and every rule she had enforced over the years. Many were angry, not just because of the false fishing club dues, but because they'd realized how often she'd wielded her authority like a weapon. Marcus wasn't involved in any of the organizing. He hadn't shown up to meetings, made speeches, or lobbied for change. He didn't need to. He'd already won his part of the battle by simply standing firm and letting the truth surface. But Karen, she was everywhere, knocking on doors, handing out carefully worded letters about community values and outsider threats. She even claimed Marcus had plans to privatize access to emergency water reserves, a phrase so bizarre that even the most gullible neighbors blinked in confusion. Still, Marcus stayed quiet until the anonymous packages started arriving. It began with a small envelope, no return address, just his name and property scrawled in messy handwriting. Inside was a single photo: Marcus standing on his dock, fishing pole in hand, circled in red marker. No note, no context. He wasn't shaken. He'd seen worse the next day. There was another envelope, this one larger. It contained printouts of comments he'd left online years ago under a Navy veterans forum, twisted to appear as if he held anti-community views. One was an old post about bureaucracy and housing systems, highlighted and scribbled with, "This man hates neighborhoods." Then came the voicemail. The caller ID was blocked. The voice was digitally altered. It hissed, "You should have stayed in the city, right? You don't belong here. The lake might have your name on it, but this is still our home." That night, Marcus walked the perimeter of his property with a flashlight. Nothing was disturbed, but he found fresh boot prints in the mud near the trail behind the boathouse, prints that didn't belong to him. He took photos, made notes, and, once again, called the sheriff's office. Deputy Eric arrived the next morning, this time with a quiet seriousness in his voice. "You think this is coming from the HOA board?" Eric asked as he examined the photos. "I think it's coming from someone who feels like they're losing everything and wants to scare me into backing down," Marcus replied. Eric looked at the boot prints again. "Well, this ain't just about a lake anymore," Marcus nodded. "It never was." Later that day, Renee called. She had been briefed about the threats and advised him to consider filing for a protective order. He declined, at least for now, not giving her the satisfaction. He said, "Marcus," Renee warned, "people like this escalate when they realize the rules don't protect them anymore. Be careful." He took her words seriously. Security cameras were installed that same evening. Motion sensor lights followed, and Marcus began keeping a loaded pistol near Bennett, out of fear, but out of the same preparedness that had kept him alive during years of Navy deployments. The Saturday of the election arrived with more tension than any HOA vote had likely ever seen. Folding chairs lined the grassy stretch beside the community clubhouse. Clipboards were handed out. Residents stood in clumps, some whispering, others clearly angry. Karen arrived, wearing a royal blue blazer and pearls, as though dressing up would somehow cover the growing cracks in her reputation. Marcus stayed away from the vote. He spent the morning on his dock, sipping coffee and watching a heron glide across the still water. Around noon, he saw Henry walking down the path with a big grin. "Well," the older man said as he settled onto the bench beside Marcus, "they did it. Karen gone by a 2/3 vote. Greg Talley's stepping in as interim president. First order of business, dissolving the fishing club and refunding everyone who got conned." Marcus gave a small nod. He felt neither joy nor victory, just relief. Finally, the community had taken its own stand. But Karen's story wasn't over that evening. Long after the lake had gone dark and the quiet settled in, Marcus stepped out onto his porch and found a single sheet of paper tucked under a rock on his steps. No envelope. Just a message typed in bold font. "A man like you doesn't belong in a place like this. You're not one of us. You never will be. Sooner or later we take it all back." No name, no threat spelled out right. But the message was clear. Marcus kept a note. He scanned it and sent it to Renee, who immediately added it to the ongoing file. Then, calmly, he locked his doors, sat at his kitchen table, and stared at the map of Lake Barrow spread before him. There was one final step he hadn't taken yet, one legal action he had been saving for the right moment. It was time to file the official restrictive covenant adjustment with the county. Once approved, it would legally block any future claim of easement or implied access across his land, including attempts by any HOA successor group to challenge his ownership. It would also allow him to post permanent, state-recognized signage and install security fencing without needing any community approval. It was, essentially, the final nail in the coffin for anyone dreaming of retaking the lake. 3 days later, the paperwork was filed. Marcus didn't boast. He didn't gloat. He simply posted 2 new signs at the dock and trailhead. Private property. Access by permission only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. A few people grumbled. Most didn't. In fact, more and more neighbors had started waving when they passed him. Some stopped to chat. A few even brought over homemade pies or offered to help fix the old fence by the water's edge. Marcus began to see something he hadn't expected: respect, not just for his ownership, but for the way he had handled it. All because, while Karen had used fear and false authority, Marcus had used patience, truth, and quiet strength. And that, slowly but surely, was changing how people saw him, not as an outsider, but as the man who saved their lake from being stolen in broad daylight by the very people they'd trusted to protect it. And Karen, rumor had it, she'd put a house up for sale. Word was, she planned to move to Florida. Some said it was to start fresh. Others whispered she was running from the embarrassment. Marcus didn't care which was true. All he knew was this: the lake was peaceful again, and, for the first time since buying it, he felt like he could finally breathe. He stood on the dock as the sun dipped low and painted the water gold, a quiet smile on his face. He hadn't just reclaimed a lake, he'd reclaimed the truth, and no HOA, no angry clipboard warrior, no petty scheme could take that from him again. Marcus stood at the edge of his dock that Sunday morning, the lake calm and mirror-like, disturbed only by the faint ripples from a lone duck gliding past. The sky above was the kind of clear that felt earned, like nature itself was exhaling, after holding its breath for too long. After everything, the conflict with Karen, the HOA's collapse, and the threats, it finally felt like the dust had settled. But as anyone with experience knows, even calm waters can hide the deepest undercurrents. For the next few weeks, life returned to something resembling normal. The fishing club had disbanded, and all those falsely charged were quietly refunded. Some neighbors, ashamed of their role in it, avoided Marcus. Others made amends in their own subtle ways, helping trim the shared trail hedges, offering friendly nods, or casually joining him in conversation about weather or wildlife. It wasn't forgiveness they were offering, it was respect still. The final chapter of this quiet war was yet to be written. It came one cloudy afternoon, just before sunset, when Marcus received an official-looking letter from the county courthouse. The envelope bore the watermark of the Civil Litigation Division. He didn't flinch. Instead, he sat at his desk, opened it slowly, and read every line with care. Karen Whitmore was suing him. The claim: intentional obstruction of communal access, disruption of HOA operations, and infliction of reputational harm. He chuckled to himself. The woman simply couldn't quit. Even removed from the HOA, stripped of authority, publicly exposed for her unethical schemes, she still believed the system could be used as her personal weapon. Marcus forwarded the documents to Renee, his attorney. She was quicker to anger than he was. "She's reaching," Renee said bluntly over the phone. "It won't go anywhere, but we'll respond properly." He nodded. "Let's go through the front door with this. No shortcuts." The court date was set for 2 weeks later. It wasn't criminal, it was civil, and Marcus knew Karen didn't have much ground to stand on. But it was about principle now. He wasn't just protecting his land anymore, he was making sure no one like her could ever weaponize power like that again. Word got around, of course. Small-town justice always travels faster than facts. By the time the hearing date arrived, the courtroom gallery had filled with several curious residents from the lakefront community. A few Marcus recognized as former fishing club members. Others were retirees with folding chairs, clearly here for the drama. Karen showed up in a dark suit and sunglasses, her posture stiff and her expression sour. She didn't acknowledge Marcus when he entered. He didn't expect her to. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, got right to the point. "Ms. Whitmore, I've reviewed your complaint. Please explain what, specifically, you believe the defendant has unlawfully done." Karen rose slowly. Her tone was brittle, but rehearsed. "Your Honor, this man has exploited a technicality in the lake's purchase history to restrict access from the community. For decades, residents have enjoyed the right to fish, walk the trails, and boat recreationally. He has not only blocked that but has also publicly humiliated and displaced our local fishing club, which provided educational programs for local children." Marcus raised his eyebrows at that last part. Educational programs. They charged $90 a month for outdated bait and broken chairs. The judge turned to Renee. "Counselor." Renee stood, calm and concise. "Your Honor, Mr. Wright is the rightful owner of Lake Barrow, as proven through his deed, title, and payment of county taxes. He has not removed any rights. The so-called communal access was a courtesy previously extended, but not a legal easement. Additionally, the plaintiff, Ms. Whitmore, is under investigation by local authorities for HOA misconduct regarding fraudulent club dues and discriminatory practices against Mr. Wright, including surveillance, harassment, and misuse of authority." The judge nodded slowly, lips pursed. "I see, Ms. Whitmore. Do you have any supporting evidence that the community had legal right to that access?" Karen faltered. "Not in writing, but historically. It was known." "Known is not law," the judge snapped. "You're talking about informal practices. That's not ownership." Case dismissed. Karen's face flushed red. You're just letting him do whatever he wants. The judge stared down at her with cold authority. You misused your position. You lied to your neighbors. And now you're wasting the court's time with a vendetta. I suggest you walk away before someone decides to counterclaim. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Karen slowly backed away from the bench, defeated in full view of the very people she once ruled with fear. Outside, as Marcus walked toward his truck, a few neighbors clapped softly. One woman, who'd previously told Marcus he was too urban for the lake, approached him with tearful eyes and offered a quiet apology. He accepted it. You didn't have to fight for this, she said, but I'm glad you did. Marcus looked out at the road leading back to his property. It was never just for me. He returned home with a quiet sense of completion. That night, as he stood at the edge of the water, the moon's reflection shimmered back at him. The fight was over not because he'd crushed someone, but because the truth had endured, because patience had outlasted aggression, because grace had weathered hatred. In the weeks that followed, Karen left the community. Her house went up for sale and was bought by a young couple who brought dogs, laughter, and gardening tools. They waved at Marcus every time they passed. The lake felt alive again. More families began visiting the public side of the lake, near the picnic grounds and county access point. Marcus, ever generous but wiser now, installed a community board near the water's edge with fishing tips, maps, and safety notices. It read, "Welcome to Lake Barrow, be kind to the water and to each other." He never mentioned himself, no credit, no name, but everyone knew. He was the man who owned the lake and saved its soul. As summer deepened and dragonflies darted through the warm air, Marcus finally built the small boathouse he had planned on day one. It wasn't fancy, just wood, stone, and a roof that caught the sun just right in the morning. He called it Stillwatch because stillness, after all, was what he had fought for, and he'd finally earned it. For more powerful stories that reveal hidden truths, subscribe to our channel, Bright Reality, like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We bring you justice, drama, and true tales with heart. See you in the next story.